the real tragedy seems to be it's quite lucrative to decommission a nuclear plant. I think OPG is going to dig into a $5 billion decommissioning fund to decommission Pickering. They've already put $3 billion into buying gas assets to replace it. Enbridge Gas, I don't know if they're already signing contracts for all that fracked Pennsylvania natural gas that's going to come and replace Pickering if we let them get away with it. What if the federal government, got involved as a matter of strategic energy policy and the urgency of not losing 1/3 of their emissions gains and did something similar to the TMX pipeline, where they bought a pipeline or they bailed out a hydro dam to the tune of around the same amount of money, $4 to $5 billion. What if they took a stake in Pickering, signaled to the market that this should be a deep green sort of green bond thing, attracted some private capital, and got this thing refurbished? Is that's within, there's nothing prohibiting them from taking such an action? Am I right?
Correct.
No legal, no legal barrier.
No, I mean, look, put it this way, when the federal government stepped in and bought an equity stake in GM and Chrysler in 2008 and 2009, they did that jointly with the province of Ontario. So that was a joint federal provincial deal, right? So obviously, OPG owns Pickering right now, right? So obviously you would have to come into a discussion. My own calculations were based on benchmarking that it would require about $10 billion to refurbish Pickering. Already we're doing Darlington, and Bruce is being done by Bruce, right? And so the idea in terms of that, if the provincial government thinks it's a little too expensive for OPG, which is owned 100% by the citizens of Ontario, is too rich for its blood, it would be totally feasible for it, if it were to desire, to get both private and or federal money into helping it out in terms of refurbishing Pickering. The mechanisms exist. As we said, the federal government has in the past has owned directly through TMX, Hibernia, equity stake. So you could invite the federal government to take an equity stake in some kind of special purpose vehicle that would otherwise own Pickering. It could do financial loan guarantees in terms of whatever borrowing has to happen. And there's other tools. For example, we know that the federal government, through its Canada Infrastructure Bank, which has a financing wind of $35 billion, that has one of its main mandates, the green economy, has already invested something like $6 billion of the 35, with the stated objective of having private-public partnerships, right, whereby they enter into either equity or loan arrangements at the invitation of other levels of government, with private participation as well. So, for example, just in Ontario, they've done 3 or 4 in Ontario and the rest of Canada. They've done 3 or 4 green energy investments. I think they invested $200 million in a grid battery storage here in Ontario. I think it's called Oneida. They've invested another, I think it was $300 million in a public-private partnership linking a transmission across Lake Erie from Ontario down to, I think is it Ohio? And they've invested several hundred million in a wind farm in, I think it's Nova Scotia.
Right.
And this is through the Canadian Investment Bank, which is a spin-off bank from the federal government. So whether it's the federal government directly through the CVED that owns the pipeline, owns Hibernia, and that has committed to helping out our fellow our fellow Canadians in Newfoundland and Labrador to the tune of $5.2 billion to help out in Muskrat Falls, which is the hydro development, or through the Canada Investment Bank or Infrastructure Bank, or through a series of other mechanisms that the federal government has, could help out the provincial government if the provincial government considers that Pickering is too rich for its blood.
Right.
And so there's lots of different ways in which this can happen.
And just to be clear again, this doesn't sound like a lot, but Canada's national emissions will go up by 1% when Pickering is closed and replaced by gas. We're about, just for sake of rounding off numbers, 800 megatons per year as a country and 8 megatons from Pickering. So just that one little power plant sitting on the land footprint of a shopping mall, that closing down, not being refurbished, increases the nation's emissions by 1%, which, I mean, to me, that was just mind-boggling to find out, and it erases 1/3 of our emissions reductions to date from our peak emissions, which, again, Canada's done a really shitty job of doing much of anything about compared to its OECD partners.